Who's here today with Henry Franklin, who belongs to the Scottish Dementia Working Group. They're going to talk about a project they've been engaged in for quite some time now, looking at some of the principles around involving people with dementia in research and community development work, all this kind of thing that we've been talking about today. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, Henry.
It's quite emotional following that, because Brian was actually a really, really important part of the Scottish Dementia Working Group research subgroup. But I've just been thinking how at the last meeting that we had, we spent some time just sharing our memories of Brian and what he meant with us. And then we just encouraged each other and said, if Brian can speak to us now, he'd tell us to get on with the work. So that's what we're going to do, but keeping Brian's memory alive in this next presentation as well.
Richard, I think we need to try and do the speakers again.
Can you hear us all? Is that okay? Can you hear us at the back okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to try and spend this speakers.
So yeah, as Richard said, I'm Sarah Keys. I work as a Chancellor's Fellow at the University of Edinburgh.
My name's Henry Rankin. I am actually the chairperson of the Scottish Dementia Working Group.
And we're presenting today on behalf of the Scottish Dementia Working Group Research Subgroup. So just to outline what we're going to do in the next sort of half hour or so, just talk a little bit about why the Scottish Dementia Working Group established a research subgroup, and then I'll talk you through a little bit about how we created the core principles. I've put out around the tables copies of a journal article which include the principles. And also, if you could just be, we've only got 3 copies, they've been so popular, we've run out. We haven't had a chance to get them all printed, but if you could just pass them out for people to be looking at as well. And then I'm going to hand over to Henry, who's going to talk you through the core principles and just a little bit about the implications of them for the research community. So, the Scottish Dementia Working Group Research Subgroup has been meeting for about 15-16 months now. There was 2 reasons why it was established. The first was that the Scottish Dementia Working Group was getting more and more requests from researchers for collaboration and research. And as I'm sure you all know, the Scottish Dementia Working Group does a myriad of work on many different levels. And actually they just weren't getting time within their main meetings to really engage with researchers and to think about research proposals. So it was decided to set up a research subgroup. There are 15 members of the research subgroup who are all members of the Scottish Dementia Working Group, plus myself and Nick Jenkins from the University of Edinburgh, and Dot Weeks and Liz Taylor, who are both dementia researchers but also very involved in the Scottish Dementia Working Group. The second reason for setting up the research subgroup was that there was actually a real passion and drive for developing ways for people with dementia to be more fully involved in research, so enabling those relationships with researchers and the research community. So the first piece of work that we did was to develop these core principles for involving people with dementia in research. So just to explain how we created the principles. There were 4 stages to creating the principles, and for kind of, if people are from a research background here, the approach we used was a refined group Delphi process, which means that we went from looking at individual views and experiences within the group, but the process enabled us to reach a consensus so that the final statements represent those views but also represent a consensus within the group. So we started off with some group discussions. And we audio recorded these discussions, which was really important because it means that in the actual core principles, the words that we're using as far as possible are actually words of people with dementia themselves. So we discussed things like what makes good research, what makes bad research, what needs to be changed for people with dementia to be more involved in research. We're just talking about the range of experiences and views within the group. From there, and this is really relevant for today, we started thinking about the fact that relationships with researchers aren't just about the researcher and people with dementia. It's about the whole research community, so it's about the funders, it's about the ethics committees, it's about people who are setting priorities and agendas within that. So we sort of worked together to think, okay, so if the research community was truly dementia friendly, what would it look like? And these are the kind of things we discussed. So we talked about who decides and whose priorities and how do we stay safe. We talked quite a lot about priorities being shared and about mutual agenda settings and working together within that research community as well. And again, we audio recorded this discussion as well so that we could use direct quotes when we were developing the principle. So based on those first two stages, we began to develop some statements. As you'll see, if you're looking at the documents, there's 6 core principles, all of which are based on direct quotes from members of the group. So this one was, I never heard what happened. So this was somebody, actually Brian this was, he'd taken part in a piece of research. It had been, he's kind of, the actual experience had been positive, but then he never actually heard back what had happened afterwards. Another one which was knowledge comes from all sorts of places. So this was talking about lived experience of people with dementia and how that positions alongside research knowledge, scientific knowledge, kind of looking at all sorts of places that knowledge comes from. And the third one relates to physical safety but also emotional safety. So we talked about safe zones for people with dementia. We also talked about safe zones for researchers. And kind of some of those ethical issues. So with each of these banners, we also had some sub-statements. So this process was quite interactive. So we put the banners up on the wall and then had the sub-statements, and we were ranking them as to whether we thought they were very important or not important at all. So this enabled us to work out as a group what was really, really most important and what was perhaps not quite so important, but we also wanted to involve in the core principles. So those are the first 3 statements. The next 3 statements were these. So keep it simple, less is best. So this is around accessibility of all parts of the research process. This one was about how researchers need to have a certain approach, and Henry will outline a bit more about what we thought that should be. But actually saying we shouldn't just be letting anyone loose, because actually they're dealing with quite potentially sensitive situations in which people need to be prepared for. And the 6th one was around dementia time, which is a phrase that the group used to sort of explain how they experience time, how people with dementia experience time, and the implications of that for dementia research. And that's quite an important key one in terms of relationships with researchers. We talk quite a lot about researcher time and dementia time and how often those are very different. We talked also about how people with dementia remember past events and the implications of that for research and research knowledge. So by this stage we had our 6 main statements, and we also had our sub-statements which we ranked together as a group. So at this point, we had all the principles written out and circulated them to the group so that people could look on their own at the statements and just think, do I agree with this? Do I want to change any wording? And it was from there that we developed the core principles as they are today. So I'm going to hand you over to Henry now, who's going to talk through the actual principles themselves.
The first core principle is about people with dementia being involved, valued and informed. This principle means that researchers should ask people with dementia how they want to be involved in research, including at what points and in what ways they want to be updated. Different people will have different views on this. We want researchers to come back and tell us the outcome of research that we have been involved in. Please be honest and don't bury bad findings. For many of us, keeping us involved means keeping our families or a trusted person who we nominate involved and informed too. In order to research, to make a full impact, professionals and others in the communities need to be involved and informed about the outcomes of research in ways which reflect their involvement in our lives. The second core principle is about how knowledge is constructed in dementia research. This principle means that it is important that researchers use the views and experiences of people with dementia as knowledge. The process of setting research agendas should happen in a mutual relationship between people with dementia and researchers. This should include people with dementia being involved in setting research priorities. For example, researchers asking people with dementia what a positive outcome would look like for them. Researchers should create opportunities for us to develop our research skills and that we can be involved and influence knowledge about dementia. When considering all of the above, researchers should consider creative methods and new ways for creating new knowledge in partnership with people with dementia. The third core principle is about physical and emotional safety. This principle means that researchers should find out each time we meet how we are and what support we need that day, including if things were to go wrong. This includes making sure that we are emotionally well and get home from our meeting safely. Also find out if there is someone else we would like to have with us when we are taking part in research. People with dementia taking part in research should always be offered counselling or emotional support. Find out where the safe zones are, both physically and emotionally, and meet us there. Be aware that research has potential to take people with dementia outside of their safe zones and be ready to respond. Researchers should be aware of their own safe zones and know where to go and not to go, physically and emotionally. The fourth principle is about how important it is for all aspects of research to be accessible to people with dementia. This principle means it is important that researchers speak in layman's language. Please keep it simple. Researchers should explain terms each time they use them. Don't use abbreviations or acronyms. People with dementia always receive a summary of a final report in simple, understandable language. All documents about research, for example, proposals, information sheets and consent forms that researchers want people with dementia to engage with, need to be in clear, accessible language. The fifth core principle is about how researchers approach working with people with dementia. This principle means that we are going to create some training resources for researchers. It is important for researchers to know that we are all different. This includes the fact that there are lots of different types of dementia and can affect people differently. And the sixth principle is about how people with dementia experience time and the implication of this for dementia research. The principle means that researchers need to consider dementia time in their expectations of research, including finding out the best time to meet and how each individual keeps track of time. Researchers should always recap on previous conversations or interviews each time they meet with people with dementia. It is important that researchers find out from us and from people who we trust what is going on in their lives, especially if they are getting in touch after a gap in contact. It is important that researchers remind us the day before that they will be meeting with us, using the communication that we indicate is best and arrive at the time they said they would. Researchers should not stay for longer than agreed unless the person with dementia invites them. We have developed an application form based on the core principles. All researchers wanting to work with the Scottish Dementia Working Group will be asked to complete this form. We have also published the principles in an academic journal. We hope that the principles will be used to make sure that all people with dementia are involved in the research.
So I've put copies of the core principles around the tables. We've also got a website where you can access the accessible version. So this is a fairly new piece of work, and I think the next stage is to actually take the principles and start using them in lots of different situations. So we're very much hoping that we'll be able to use this as a kind of two-way discussion around how the principles might work within the memory-friendly neighbourhoods work as well. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.